Today is the 25th anniversary of the first World AIDS Day. There are different accounts of how World AIDS Day came into being, but one that seems fairly credible is that there was a days-long prayer vigil at MCC San Diego in the early 80s, and that it was out of that observance that World AIDS Day began. And whether or not World AIDS Day began at that very church or not, it does point to something that is very true, which is that from the very, very beginning, MCC was at the very center of caring for and advocating on behalf of people with AIDS, at a time especially when many churches would not get anywhere near the subject. Today, all over the world, organizations, secular communities, and communities of faith are observing this 25th World AIDS Day, and we are all focused on this international theme of getting to zero. It's like we'll be doing tonight at Compass. The Voices of Pride will be singing at 6 p.m., and I'll be helping to lead the interfaith service at 6:30, and weather permitting, there will be a candlelight march afterwards. But everything we do will be on this theme of getting to zero. Zero new transmissions, zero discrimination, and most of all, zero deaths. And of course, this is our focus here in this church. It is with everything we do when it comes to HIV and AIDS. However, there is one thing that stands out. Because HIV is a religiously stigmatized disease for being sexually shameful. I want to say that again, because HIV is a religiously stigmatized disease for being sexually shameful. MCC is uniquely placed to speak out on a different kind of getting to zero, which is this. It is our calling to get to zero shame. Amen. Getting to zero shame is our calling this day and always. Will you pray with me, please? God of healing and hope, on this day especially, may we remember, even in this season as we prepare for your arrival, may we remember that you did take on flesh, that you came to us in a human body, so that your body might touch other human bodies, so that you too might know what it means in our very flesh to hurt, to be broken, that you might know, God, what it is to feel pain, what it is to die. But most of all, God, may we remember that you came and took on flesh that you might show us what resurrection looks like and what it really is, and that it really is possible. And so, God, as we open to your word now, to your wisdom and to your spirit, may we know that as we sit here and take you in our very flesh, that you, God, know what we feel like, and that you are here with us now. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts bring healing and justice to our world. Amen.
Amen.
Do these words sound familiar? The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me and has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to bind up the brokenhearted and proclaim liberty to the captives, to all those who mourn in Zion. If you have heard these words before, it might be because you remember Jesus speaking them. In the Gospel of Matthew, at the very beginning of his ministry, Jesus spends 40 days wandering and being tempted in the wilderness, comes right out, marches right into the synagogue, and says these words. But they weren't original with him. Jesus was quoting one of the ancient prophets of his own tradition in Judaism. He was quoting the prophet Isaiah, the very prophet who we heard from this morning. Presumably, it was the prophet Isaiah who first said these words about being anointed by God to send good news to the oppressed. And the oppressed, in the prophet Isaiah's time, they needed some good news in a big way. See, the Babylonians had come along in about the year 587 BCE, and they had wiped out Jerusalem and destroyed the temple, and they carried the children of Israel off to Babylon to live in exile there. And you would think that the prophet Isaiah was speaking to these people. They must be the brokenhearted who needed some good news. But actually they weren't. It wasn't until about 48 years later that they were allowed to leave Babylon and go home to Zion. And that's where the words, "those who mourn in Zion," come from in this passage that we heard. The prophet was called to these who were mourning in Zion. And the reason they were in mourning is because they were home and they thought everything was going to be great. But after years of trying, they were frustrated and humiliated that they had not been able to rebuild the city. They had not been able to restore the temple to its former glory. And so God sends the prophet to these people to help them change the way they were seeing themselves. They were seeing themselves as failures. They were feeling shame. They were embarrassed and humiliated. And God sent the prophet Isaiah to heal their broken hearts and to help them see themselves in a new way, to help them choose to live in a different way, to take off those ashes they were wearing, ashes which were a sign of grief and mourning and humiliation. And instead the prophet came to give them a garland, a mantle of praise, so that they would know that not only were they going to be able to rebuild and to repair, but they were going to be able to restore the devastations of past generations. Is there anyone here in this room today who knows just a little bit about the devastations of past generations? The devastations of past generations are right here in this room with us. And talking about it is complicated. It's one of the things that makes World AIDS Day especially difficult. Because think about it. In this room, are you in this room right now? Yes. Are you right here? Yes. Are you fully here?
Yes.
Because right here in this room right now, there are some of us who have lost so many we loved to AIDS. Friends, brothers, sisters, children, parents, partners. And in this room right now, there are people who don't know a single person who has died from AIDS because they're about 20 years younger. And we are all in this room together. In this room, there are men and women, and even more specifically, there are gay men and lesbians who, by and large, have radically different experiences of HIV and AIDS. Most of us in this room are white. Some of us are people of color in a world where the face of AIDS is increasingly brown or black. And in this room, right now, there is the biggest divide of all. In this room, right now, there is the viral divide. There are those who are HIV positive, and there are those who are HIV negative. But one thing that we all have in common, assuming that we are here today because we want to follow the teachings and the life of Jesus the Christ, the one thing we all have in common is that we are the ones called, like the prophet Isaiah, to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted and proclaim liberty to the captives, to those who are still mourning the devastations of former generations. We are the ones called to wipe those ashes off and replace them with a garland, with a mantle of praise. This is why we are here. This is our calling. It was the prophet Isaiah's calling. It was Jesus' calling. And Jesus was the one who said, "Greater things will you do than I have done." We are called, just like Jesus, to bring the good news. But if we are going to fulfill this calling, I believe we must first tell the truth. That the oppressed and the brokenhearted and those who are living captive to fear are right here among us, right now, in this room. There are people here in this room who are still deeply grieving those they have lost. And let's be honest, so many were lost to AIDS in the 80s and the 90s because AIDS was shamed from the very beginning. And it was largely shamed by the church, by those who spoke for God. And there were others. There were 8 years of a presidential administration. 8 years of Ronald Reagan. And I don't mean to single out any one politician. I am not a fan of any of them. 8 years of Ronald Reagan, who for 8 years never said AIDS once when millions of people were dying. Yes. And instead there were the signs. Do you remember the signs that showed what gay stood for? Got AIDS yet? It was devastating to our community that was just coming out of the closet. You know, we'd only had about 10 years to really get our steam up coming out of the closet, and we were bursting out. Coming out as lesbians and gay men, as bisexuals, as transgender people, casting off that shame, finding our pride, some even going back to their places of faith with pride. And then right along came the most horrific perfect storm to just cement that shame right in place and crush our people with it. And today, the devastations of those former generations are still with us. They are still with us in shame and oppression and the captivity of fear of those living with HIV and AIDS. Right now, right in this room, this moment, there are people sitting here who are living in fear and shame because they are HIV positive. And I know this because I'm your pastor, and people tell me things. And I'm your pastor, and there are others who don't. So I know some people here who are HIV positive that other people don't know about. And I know that there are people here who are HIV positive that I don't know about, because nobody does. I know, because I hear the stories. People in our congregation rejected by people they thought loved them when they disclosed their status. And I'm speaking specifically to the men's community. The divide is especially huge there between positive and negative. And I'm not talking about sex here for the moment. I'll talk about that in a moment. Just the stigma between the two. We must come out about this truth, and we must speak the unspeakable. We must say the things out loud that we know people think but don't say in polite society, or at least not face to face. Facebook and Grindr might be another matter. We know who the HIV positive people are, don't we? They are the dirty ones as opposed to the clean ones, if you read men's personal ads. They are the careless ones, the irresponsible ones, the unrepentant, promiscuous ones. They are the damaged goods, the ones who should feel ashamed because, you know, they really screwed up. They should have known better, shouldn't they? But who among us has not had at least one human moment in our lifetime? Anyone here? Yeah. Is there any one of us in this room who doesn't have shame living in our bodies for something? Something we did, something done to us. Something we regret. something we just didn't know. We are all human. And yet, this divide between us makes some apparently better humans than others. Shame is bred by blame, and blame is pushed by fear. And see, if I am better than you because I'm HIV negative, then it's easier to keep you in your place because you're HIV positive. And in fact, by keeping you in your place by HIV positive, it makes me better because I'm HIV negative. Does that make sense?
Yes.
We don't want it to make sense consciously, but that's how it works. Shame's great power is that it convinces us that we are absolutely unlovable. That there is somehow something inherently wrong and damaged about us. That we are broken beyond repair. We are unworthy of community, unworthy of acceptance and love. And it whispers that lie into our hearts that we better keep secret, because if we don't, we're going to lose what little grasp we have on what small amount of happiness we can find. Shame tells us that because of who we are, because of what we have done, because of what others have done to us, because of our HIV status, we are unworthy to receive love. And worst of all, we are unworthy of God's love. That is the poison of shame. And it is the reason why, whenever we have parents who come here to visit, and I believe we have some here today, if I am fortunate enough to get to meet them before the service when they're here for the first time, what is it I always say? Thank you for being here, because so many of us do not have parents who will come and be here with us.
Yes.
How can we believe God, our heavenly parent, loves us if our earthly parent rejects us? And so when we have parents here who make no mistake, if you are a parent here today, congratulations, you have a whole room full of children.
Yes.
You are our surrogate parents. You are the face of God to us, who reminds us that God, our heavenly parent, will never push us away. That is the gift of parents in this place. It's why I always make a point of saying it. Shame kills. It keeps people from getting tested, and the longer you don't get tested, the harder it is for treatments to make you better and keep you alive longer. And the longer you don't get tested, the more people you may infect. Shame kills. It convinces us we are not worthy of love, of being cared for, of health care, of being supported. Shame kills us. And I'm so glad the theme this year is getting to zero, because that's all about getting to zero deaths. Getting to zero death of the body. But you know what? The church has got to speak out on getting to zero deaths of the spirit, because that is what shame kills. Shame kills the spirit. And my friends, shame has no place in God's house or among God's people. Especially God's people who in this place know what it is like to cast off that shame that was first put on us in that valley of the shadow of death called homophobia. We know what it was like to cast that off. So how can we tolerate shame about anything else in this place? Again, I just want to say, I know it's complicated. And I know there's that little thing called sex that gets very complicated when HIV is in the picture. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't talk about it. I'm not saying that sometimes hard decisions don't have to be made. But what I see over and over again is people just getting dumped. People getting pushed away. People being treated like they are worthless. We can have hard conversations, but have them with respect, while we inherently affirm the value and dignity of each other. Can we not?
Yeah.
Can I get a bigger amen than that?
Amen.
There is nothing that we can't do while treating one another with love as we wish to be treated. That is our calling, to love one another as we love ourselves. It's what Jesus says is the greatest commandment. And it is the good news that we have been called to bring, just like the prophet Isaiah. So guess what? We are going to bring some good news today. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. Now I'm going to ask some of you to step outside your comfort zone. I'm going to ask some of you to step way outside your comfort zone. If you would please, hold up your right hand. Keep it up, or hold it up this way. Now, your left hand. Now watch, ready? See? That wasn't so hard, was it?
Yeah.
For those of you who don't do the clapping thing in church. The roof didn't cave in? In just a moment, I'm going to ask us to spend 1 minute making some noise. I don't care if you clap, or if you pound the floor, or if you wolf whistle, or whatever it is that you do. I'm going to ask us to make that noise for 1 minute for one reason. Because I'm going to ask anyone who is willing, who is HIV positive, to stand. And for 1 minute, I want us to shower them with audible love. And while you're standing there, if there are people around you, look around. And if you're HIV positive and you can't bring yourself to stand, maybe sometime in that minute you might be able to, so that you can take that in, because you're worthy of it. 1 full minute. Do it for the people that you lost. I don't care if you make the noise out of rage for the people that you lost, or grief for the people that you lost, or joy because you're glad your friends are still here, or whatever reason. Just make noise. And in that noise, let it be the voice of God saying, "You are my beloved child, and in you I am well pleased." Are you ready? Now folks, the 9 o'clock did this, okay? If the 9 o'clock did it, I promise you can do it. All right. If you are HIV positive and you are willing to stand, will you stand now, please? See if we can do that for 1 minute. We can do it all the time, 1 minute at a time. I hope you looked around to see who was standing. Give those folks hugs. Remind them every day, because they get a very different kind of message all the rest of the time. This is what God has called us to do, to bring good news to the brokenhearted this way. We can do this. We can get to 0.